מיד נלמד עם שיעור תלמוד 10 הספירות עם הרבש, נקרא מתוך תלמוד 10 הספירות כרך.
We're about to study a study of the Sefirot lesson with Rabash.
או פנימי, או...
We're going to be in the inner light, item 35, starting with the words and the matter of these 9 lights. Before that, we will read item 35 in the words of the Ari.
דף ש"ט זין, אות למ"ה דברי הארי.
Item 35, the words of the Ari.
מתי ולא מתי.
Though the reality of mati and not mati expands, does not expand, would need to be clarified what it means. At first it was said that the light begins to come in Keter, and all the 9 lights are included in it. It then returned to be not expanding, not mati. As it returned, and the light emerged from there and reaches the Keter. But the other 9 lights remained in the Keter, since there's a power in the Keter to tolerate them. Then, when it does not expand in the Keter, the no mati, the light to it, then Keter extends to Chokhmah face to face. The 9 lights were put and given in Chokhmah. Then Chokhmah turned her face after receiving the 9 lights and illuminates to Binah face to face. Her illumination alone, but she does not give her yet the 7 lights. We'll enter the lesson. Where are the 9 lights? These 9 lights that Chokhmah received from Keter has already been explained above. There are the remains of the courses that was left of the male of Keter after its refinement, which is phase 3 of clothing, and is the record of Chokhmah of the first expansion that was incorporated in the male of Keter. Again, and is the record of Chokhmah of the first expansion that was incorporated in the male of Keter. And this is one light. Also, she received the rest of the coarseness of the female of Keter, which is phase 2, and the level of Binah, where the 2 levels are incorporated. In Binah, the upper phase, it includes the lower phases. That's what he says. Sag is called a chab. Why is Sag called a chab? Sag is phase 2, including Chot and Peh as well. This is how it also says. That's one light. Phase 3 is one light. And also from phase 2, which is called Binah. And in her, in Binah, where the 2 levels are incorporated of Zeranpin and of Malchut. Together there are 8 lights. And with phase 3 of the male, there are 9 lights. So he explains, what are the 9 lights? Where do we have the 9 lights from? And if we say that 3-2 remain, and 3-2 is 1 light, and 2 is 8 lights, Binah, Zeranpin, Malchut. Here a question should be asked. He says that 4 of clothing remain, and 3 of coarseness. So when he says 3 of clothing remains with what was prior, 3 of coarseness remains 3 of clothing, or from 2 of coarseness, or not. Here he goes a little more detailed for us. What does he say? The matter of these 9 lights that Chokhmah received from Keter has already been explained above. They are the remains of the coarseness that was left of the male of Keter after its refinement, which is phase 3, and is the record of Chokhmah, of who? Of the first expansion. Meaning that it's Galgalta. That was included, the 3 from the 4 of Keter. And this he does not say here. He thinks that 3 of clothing is only who is he asking about, and who is he thinking of? 4 of clothing, just like in Bina, which includes also Zeranpin Malchut. Malchut, he learns that 4 of clothing is included in 2 of clothing also. And here he gets a little bit more precise, and look what's written here. And is the record of Chokhmah of the first expansion, called Galgalta, that was incorporated in the male of Keter, called 4 of clothing. It turns out that 4 of clothing was refined to 3 of clothing. And 3 of coarseness remained somewhere there. We don't talk about it here. 3 of coarseness in Partzuf Avav. You see? I ask if 3 of coarseness that was in the Kli of Keter remains from the coarseness of the clothing of 3 and the of 3 of clothing for the sake of the Kli of Chokhmah. And I would learn here that there are 3 of clothing from the light of 3 of coarseness of the Kli of Keter of Ab. And he teaches what is 3 of clothing, what remains in the Partzuf of Galgalta. How did it come here? It's included with 4 of clothing that was in the Kli of Keter. Now you see what you just said to me now? We need to still remember this, always this rule, that when we speak of records that rose above, incorporated in the screen, we should speak of 2 kinds of records. One, what remains in the vessels to sustain life in the vessels, the records that remained in the vessels. 2, we learned what the screen is included in the records that rises above. In part 8, he distinguishes it this way. The records that remain in the vessels are called old vessels, and the records are called old records. Whereas the screen that rises upwards with the records, this we already correlate with the new Partzuf. Since these records who rose upwards is where a new Partzuf came, a new level. And then they clothe in the old vessels where we have records there, from there. And these are 2 things. Don't mix them. What's written above? And he gives in Chokhmah the 9 lights, and he gives in Chokhmah the 9 lights, and then Chokhmah turns her anterior after receiving the 9 lights and shines to Bina face to face. Panim bepanim. The illumination only. she does not give the 7 lights yet. What does this mean? If you were to understand, if Chokhmah received 9 lights, Keter had 10, and Chokhmah 9. How much is needed for Binah? Student 8. 8. You tell him how much did he give? 1. 1. But 7 doesn't give lights. If so, it means from here that the illumination alone is called achap. What is achap? We'll see later. But first, the understanding of the words, okay? Let's look below. Chokhmah turns her anterior after receiving the 9 lights and shines to Binah. This refers to the turning of the anterior only of the male of Chokhmah and not the phase of the female of Chokhmah. This is so because the turning of the anterior means refinement of the coarseness and the departure of the light from there, since then, after the refinement, what does the Kli do? She takes the lower phase, which is more important for her, because this light, the vessel, turns its interior downward. What was above anterior is below in importance. Hence, after Chokhmah received her 9 lights from Keter, which are, one is called the male, and the female of the vessel of Chokhmah, which is from Binah below, as we just spoke of, and the screen of the coarseness of phase 3 of the male was refined into the coarseness of phase 2. And you find what's now in the Kli of Chokhmah? 2 bits, 2 twos, 2 of clothing and 2 of coarseness. Exactly. And you find that the vessel of the male turns its anterior downward, only 3 becomes 2, and its posterior upward in importance, meaning she received what was important to it. This means what is below to above, that is, its importance of the state of gadlut, of the coarseness, is cancelled. 3 receives 2. At that time, that residue of the male of Chokhmah is bestowed, which is phase 2, upon the vessel of Binah. As was said, that Chokhmah turned her anterior after receiving the 9 lights and shines to Binah, meaning the phase of male of the vessel of Binah. But the 7 lights, she doesn't give it. Why? We'll see that later. First of all, why? Since it did not refine only 3 of clothing. Now we ask, why do we not speak also of Keter that was refined prior to this clothing and later the coarseness?
4-3.
Yes. So why does he not say there that 4 was refined to 3 of clothing? Rather, what are we thinking? The 2 of them together, 4-3 together. This is what he asks. However, the Ari did not explain any refinement in the male of the vessel of Keter. Rather, he wrote it along with the female of Keter in one refinement, which he says that 4-3 refined it to 3-2. Why? This is because the male of Keter, 4 of clothing, does not have any phase of coarseness of extension, which is included in the refinement. Other, what do we have? But only the phase of clothing.
Only the phase of clothing, and there is no refinement on its own phase of clothing, since there is no coarseness in it whatsoever. What does it have? It has the 4th degree of clothing. That's what we learned. Rather, it is incorporated and connects with the coarseness of the female, with phase 3 of coarseness. Thus, the matter of its refinement comes along with the refinement of the screen of the female, phase 3 of coarseness, which is why the Ari includes them as one refinement. But vessel of Chokhmah. However, the male of the vessel of Chokhmah, with the record of the light of Chokhmah that remains in the first expansion, as in the previous item, also has the phase of coarseness of extension. We'll see that in a moment. For this reason, it is necessary for it to be refined before the female is refined, since its measure of coarseness is greater, and it is phase 3, and the female is phase 2. So he explains that Patzuf Ab, there's something that remains from Patzuf Galgalta in phase 3 of coarseness. That's why when I say that phase 4 of clothing was refined, and it remains in phase 3 of clothing, he also wants to say phase 3 of clothing that you have here, since there's coarseness of phase 3 in general on that degree, so phase 3 of clothing is also considered coarseness. Why? Because there is no phase 4 of coarseness in Patzuf Ab. Everything it only receives from phase 3. But 3, the whole Patzuf of Ab is 3. That's why he thinks that also phase 3 of coarseness and clothing. On the other hand, he says it's only a female, and then he says that he has coarseness. So there cannot be any phase 4 of coarseness on degree of Ab. It has nothing, so that's why I'll repeat it. However, the male vessel of Chokhmah, which is the record of the light of Chokhmah, phase 3 of clothing, it remains in the first expansion as in the previous item. Also has a phase of coarseness extension, in general in the degree I wanted to say. So if I say that it's an extension, why do I divide it to a male? That he wants to elaborate that in general the degree has phase 3 of coarseness. That's why there's coarseness to the extent that I can say that it was refined. From phase 4 of clothing, there is no coarseness of 4 that I could say that it refined. There is no coarseness. For this reason, it is necessary for it to be refined. Phase 3 of clothing before the female is refined in phase 2 of coarseness, since the measure of coarseness is greater, as it is phase 3 and the female is phase 2. So why is it difficult? If he says that the coarseness he extended, why does he consider it as a male? You have to say that the male is called that it has a middle phase, meaning in the whole degree in Patzuf Ab, there's phase 3 of clothing, of coarseness.
Phase 3, why is it male?
We'll see it in a moment. Let's finish. It is only illumination, but she still does not give her 7 lights. It means that it gives only 1 light of the male in the vessel of Binah, since its time has now come to be refined, and it gives its residue to Bina. However, the time of the female, while the clothing, when it refined, phase 2 and remained phase 1, which is 7 lights, the time of the female to be refined has not come yet, and therefore she still does not give the 7 lights attributed to the female of Binah has been explained in the previous item. 36. Afterwards, the light of Keter returned to being expanding in Keter, and the light of Chokhmah was concealed once more in Keter because of her desire. Because of her desire for Chokhmah, to connect with Keter at that time. When the vessel of Chokhmah wants to connect to Keter, You don't see where it's written? That the light of Chokhmah wants to connect to Keter. That's what's written above. And the light of Chokhmah was concealed once more in Keter. Why? Because of her desire to the light of Keter, to connect with Keter. At that time, the vessel of Chokhmah turned its interior to Keter and gave it to Keter, its light, the light of Chokhmah. Yet the light of Binah that was in Chokhmah does not rise with it to Keter because of the craving of the sons, of which she is the mother. This means that in the vessel of Chokhmah there are two lights, the light of Chokhmah and the light of Binah. The light of Binah desires to connect to Keter, so it's distant, but it ascends to Keter. And the light of Binah in the vessel of Chokhmah descends to Binah. Why? Because of the craving of the sons, of which she is the mother. We have already explained that there is return of an interior and posterior only in the phase of the vessels. However, in the lights themselves, there is no interior and posterior, only expansion, the light and departure. 36, inner light. The expansion in Keter and the light of Chokhmah was connected once more in Keter. Interpretation: when Chokhmah was refined, and her light of male and female departed and rose to Keter, the Nukva of Keter grew coarser again in her coarseness, what she had before. Which coarseness did the vessel of Keter have? Of phase 3. The vessel of Keter and the light of Chokhmah was drawn once more to the vessel of Keter. Phase 3. Coarseness of phase 3. We have to say phase 4 also. Thus the light once more expanded in Keter. The reason for it is the male of Chokhmah who rose to the vessel of Keter, which is a record that remained of the first expansion from Patzuf Galgalta, from the coarseness of phase 3 that was there. And it was in the vessel of Chokhmah, which? Phase 3 of clothing, phase 1 and 2 of coarseness. Since phase 3 of the clothing that was in the vessel of Chokhmah, from Patzuf Galgalta that remained, now by the refining, since he rose and was incorporated in the female of Keter that was also in the coarseness of phase 3, also in that coarseness, before she was refined, now, due to the ascent of the male of Chokhmah, her previous coarseness has now returned to her, and the upper coupling returned to her. So something new is written here, what we haven't learned until now. Up to now we learned that when phase 3 was refined, we remain with phase 2. We don't say that phase 3 ascends upward and it wants to perform a coupling again. That's how we learn from Patzuf Galgalta. But what was refined? Refined. Here, he comes and says something new. Was refined. Only here he says that he refined. So the records rise upward, and a new coupling is made on the previous phase. So he comes and says that the reason is that phase 3 of clothing ascended to the place that phase 3 of coarseness awakened. So again, you can receive why. In Galgalta, we didn't learn here. There we learned that the degree of Chokhmah refined from phase 3 and came out to phase 2. It doesn't come again as phase 3. So here he says, no, it doesn't give a reason. It's not explained.
נעבור לחלק הבא של השיעור, לימוד בין חברים כאחד.
We're going to move to the next